We're part of the problem. The good news is that we can also be part of the solution. What stories are we telling? Because I think the gloom and doom stories have not been helpful. So what are the other stories we can tell? And where I think that the IDG initiative in general have found something. There is a better, larger story we can tell that puts sustainability higher on the agenda. And that sort of narrative in framing it like a hero's journey, like this huge challenge that gives us agency, is something that I think chief sustainability officers can do better in advocating for the changes needed. And it's happening. I think it's really a movement that is on the go.
Hello and welcome to the CSO Impact Podcast, where we talk to leaders in sustainability. We're discussing how we can work in a way that makes a positive impact on the planet. I'm your host, Harald Neidhardt, and today it's my real pleasure to welcome Jan Artem Henriksson here with us. He is the Executive Director of the Inner Development Goals, or we will probably refer to them as the IDGs. Jan, thank you so much for being on the show today. How are you?
I'm great. It's an honor to be here with you, Harald.
Well, we have had a couple of touch points in the last year, speaking of New York and other things. But now at the beginning of this new year, why don't we dig in a little bit and get to know you and start maybe with the getting to know a little bit more about the IDGs and your organization. So why don't you help to describe a little bit about the IDGs and your role in this organization?
Sure. So the Inner Development Goals Foundation is a non-for-profit, an open source organization that looks to how can we accelerate the work towards sustainable development goals using inner development. So we have been co-creating a framework. We're a young organization, just 3 years old. It's more than 1,000 researchers, experts who have contributed. And we found 5 dimensions, 23 skills that can help us be more effective when we work with sustainable development. And we're working usually with big corporations like Google, Novartis, IKEA, and with governments, with the White House, it's going to be more difficult now, to be honest, like after January. But we had a lovely roundtable with some chief sustainability officers, learning officers, and so on. Costa Rica is the first country who have adopted our framework nationally, and it's a lot cooking. So for a young foundation, it's really been a global journey now with around 700 hubs around the world, practitioners from both the sustainability, HR, and leadership development sector collaborating to be more effective in the pursuits of sustainability and a flourishing world.
I think maybe we just dig deep into this at the beginning, because we will touch on a couple of things. I saw there was this fantastic event in October, it was, I think, and also I saw that your logo, which is, let's say, circles, which can be placed inside the SDG, big circles, so to say, but there was a twist to the logo. Maybe you can talk about both of these things, because that for me was something remarkable towards the end of last year.
To start with, I think we have one of the world's best communication bureaus. It's the same designer who created the Sustainable Development Goals framework. And there is so much good science out there, but it's sometimes not used. And what we try to do is to say, can we take the very messy field of leadership development? It's just as messy as our external world, but we did manage to reduce it to 17 global goals, or the SDGs, and with all these colorful icons. And we've tried the impossible to reducing a huge field of inner development into 5 dimensions, 23 skills, also with beautiful symbols and so on. And that is symbolized in the 5 circles of being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting on the SDGs. And there is different skills in all of these. And our thesis is basically that sustainability in general, it's not just a technical challenge. It's not like taking out the CO2 or creating a new drug or building an airplane. It's an adaptive challenge, which means that we need to change in the ways how we show up, how we relate to each other and nature, how we collaborate, and we need to build skills. So basically it involves all of us we're part of the problem. The good news is that we can also be part of the solution. And if we start and also work with the inner when we talk about sustainability, this is how we can be much more effective. And we see this from science. And with good communication, it of course starts with the logo, with the colors, with the symbols, we have managed to reach millions of people in just a few years and inspiring more to actually care about these issues, because this is also where it begins, that not everybody even sees that there is a problem.
Fantastic. And what I was relating to the logo is that first they were like really round circles, and now they're more wiggly, right? More like a handwritten thing.
Yeah. So that, now I see where you're shooting. Our designers made a trip to Japan, and then they realized that like our very perfect circles are too perfect. And in the world of human development, nothing is perfect. We're all incomplete. Like inner development is this vulnerable stance of realizing that we can all improve, and that no matter how great leaders or chief sustainability officers we think we are, there is always things also in our character and the way we show up where we could grow. So there is a stance for lifelong learning, and therefore also the circles are not perfect in our logo now. And there has been a lot of talk in the community about it.
I like it because it makes it more human and imperfect and, maybe more relatable and playful. So I think it was a good twist to, maybe not noticeable for most of us, but if you really look at it, I think it really makes sense to have that wiggly thing inside. And it's even vibrating, like string theory.
Exactly.
All right. Speaking of strings and wiggly human factor, let's talk about you and your role in the organization. How did you get to what are you doing there right now, and how did you get there? Tell us a little bit about your personal journey.
Yeah, so thank you. I always usually start with that I was born in Soviet Union in a place called Zaporozhye in Ukraine. And then I moved to Sweden when I was 8. In Soviet Union and Sweden are very different as systems and with very different characteristics. And except for that, I grew up very culturally confused, as many immigrants or children of immigrants do. I've also always seen the effect of different systems and what they can produce. And Sweden is a lovely country in many ways. And my question has always been, how can we produce systems that are more healthy and maybe a little bit more like Sweden and less like Soviet Union? And I think it's a serious issue because I've been doing a lot of leadership development, trained more than 100,000 people in the corporate world when I was running the consultancy. And I think a lot of the corporate environments are unfortunately a little bit more like Soviet Union than they are like Sweden, So I've tried to bring a little bit more of the human factor into large systems and how to create that. That has been a lifelong pursuit. And after 10 years, when I did leave my consultancy that I founded, my question was, how do we move the whole paradigm to understanding that culture and leadership development really matters? There are some really good companies like in Sweden, Spotify, we have IKEA that care about culture and they make it a strategic priority. And no matter which field we're in, I think if we have a good and healthy culture, we will have a much better impact on the world if people care and do not cut corners or just, sometimes have these fuck it moments and they just go for the simpler solution. So for me, culture has been really, really important. And also the question, how do we integrate and create a healthy culture that is beyond the chief HR or sustainability officer or CEO, where basically like in Sweden, equality is really, really a strong norm. And people at least have to pay lip service to it. Otherwise, they're going to be out the window. And I do think that leadership development and cultural work has this huge potential. But today, we are not even at the stage where people pay lip service to it. Many of us, unfortunately, ignore that. And there is a lot of good science and practice that can help us with some of the challenges we're facing. So this is how the Inner Development Goals Foundation was initiated together with some colleagues who've been working around the Oak Island Foundation. We took the initiative. We brought together 8 organizations, including the Stockholm Resilience Center, a Harvard Human Flourishing Program, IMD Business School, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And we joined forces and created a movement that is open source and that is trying to close some of the knowing doing gaps. We all know that psychological safety is great, but we don't always have the teams with the psychological safety required to make the difficult decisions and so on. So how do we close some of those gaps has been one of my big questions.
Before we talk about the roles of chief sustainability officers, I want to just learn a little bit more about you and your career. Tell us a little bit about maybe some either challenges and or initiatives that you worked on maybe prior to the IDGs that you're proud of and that were remarkable in certain ways.
I do think, as I said, that leadership and culture matters. And I think we also learn a lot through failure. So it's hard to say what is the biggest achievements, because some of the biggest compromises I've done earlier that have been failures, and when I really failed as a leader, have taught me to have the integrity and courage, in just a few cases later to actually do great work. So I remember a specific case in the steel industry when I was working with a CEO and they wanted to change the industry from a very strong macho culture to having a little bit more of psychological safety. And I'm standing on the stage with the CEO and we've prepared to do some talk about values work and personal values. And he prepared some really good examples where he was to talk about some conflicts he had with his teenage daughter and how she has affected him. And just before we go out, he says, look, I can't do it. This will not be a good cultural fit. And trying to, let's go the easy way out. And you just introduce this. And I'm saying look, if you're not doing what we practice for, you're going out on that stage alone. I'm just going to stay here.
Wow.
Because I had a CEO once backing down. And not in just backing down because it was vulnerable, because it was sensitive and something that they were not used to. And then we come out and he says, okay, let's do this. So we're walking out, we're doing it. And it came down two of the most transformative hours in their corporate history, because he opened up around some of his values and also challenges as a leader, as a parent. And that was an introduction to a storytelling exercise around personal values that they were all going to do in small groups of 2 or 3 people. So all these 300 top executives in the steel industry that had this very rough culture took a different road, start talking about personal values, about their inner compass, some about their struggles. And what I heard, this was a very pivotal moment for the company and their culture and how they collaborate and how they show up together. And for me, that's big, especially with my history again, with some toxic masculinity. And when I can see that shift to something else just through a few scientifically proven exercises and a few leaders who dare to show up in a different way. And that can, of course, later also be linked to results in collaboration, in long-term orientation, and so on. And so that has been some of my proudest moments, maybe.
Yeah, great. I think that I witnessed this also a couple of times when you have a group and everybody is introducing themselves. But if one person, especially in the beginning, opens up a little bit more than expected and everyone's like, I know him or her and he will probably say this. And then he totally switches to another topic. All of a sudden, everybody kind of so, if he is going already, let's say 3 levels down, then I might even go 4, or, well, I might stay 2, but I was prepared only to stay on the, on eye level. So I think it's super interesting and important. I think there's maybe a way that you might not even call it, or maybe we have to call it not vulnerability, because that might, I'm not vulnerable, but, I'm opening up. I'm opening up. I can talk about, I don't know, fly fishing or something like that. That's more personal to me as a Nordic person. So I think sometimes words can be so powerful and in itself be a border,
Now, there is this trust and openness spiral. So we know that if people are more open, we're going into a more trusting relationship. And this is something that can really be consciously used. I mean, Christiana Figueres used it a lot to create the Paris Agreement and creating an atmosphere where people meet as people. And as you say, yes, words do matter. If vulnerability is difficult, let's talk about openness. Let's talk about courage. What are the words that can help people show themselves more authentically? And this does magic for our way to collaborating, for our way to finding compromises, and so on. And again, we all know this. Unfortunately, we don't use the science or power of that when we are to actually negotiate or solve or meet around the table with some of the biggest challenges on the table globally.
Maybe this is a good moment to have maybe one or two examples of what was touching you on your IDG summit, I think it's called. So your event in October, I think 3,000 people, big, cool theater, red. I saw the pictures, fantastic. I saw you work with the UN FCCC. We worked with them 2019, but we had, thanks to you and Laila, we had Masamba on stage in New York. And so I think he came also to Sweden and was really also overwhelmed or touched from the quality of the work/workshop. Can you maybe highlight one? I know it's impossible for 3 days to do it in 3 seconds, but maybe just one or two things that you think are exemplary maybe for the work you're doing and the reaction maybe some of the people in the audience and participants had.
Yeah, sure. So, we do gather a few thousand people in Stockholm. There's almost 10,000 people that follow us online. And I think what we're bringing is hope to a very dark narrative. I'm married to a chief sustainability officer who is now working in a finance sector. I've seen how extremely difficult it is to realize, to see all the data, to talk about these challenges, and also see that we're not moving in the right direction. And many times we get stuck in both that narrative, and there is also very few stories that point to a way out of it. Like, okay, so how do we do this? What needs to happen? And I think through the inner development goals, what we say is like, look, we need to redefine the problem. It's not a climate problem we have. It's a behavioral problem. It's a cultural problem where we, as the people of the world, or people in power specifically, we do not care enough about these issues. We do not prioritize them, and we unfortunately don't have the skills. It's not that we're bad people, but we are not at the level of collaboration or system thinking to actually solve these challenges. So we need to work on our skill levels and our motivation to sort this out. And this narrative, I do think, brings hope and agency, and not just by speaking about it in abstract terms, but actually by bringing people from different walks of lives, big organizations, NGOs, countries who are actually doing it, who are moving in the right direction. We had a person from the White House who was arranging the roundtable. And, US government is a huge apparatus with one of the biggest employers in the world. And they initiated the Greening Governments Initiative. So there is more than 50 governments who are working towards becoming climate neutral. And of course, there will be good examples and bad examples also. Some are only doing the lip service of it, just like I was speaking in Sweden and the gender equality. Some really care about it, like I do. I really, that's close to my heart with my upbringing and everything. Others, they just say, yeah, that's an important topic. But then looking, and this is where I also find hope in the learning systems between the corporates, between the NGOs and different governments, where there will always be a few who are really trying something new. And I think we're in a point in time where we need to learn from each other. We need that inspiration. We need to see what works and bring it home quite quickly. So this is, I think, what touched me a lot, is hearing the different stories from government agencies, from corporates, and brave leaders taking the risk to put them out there to try something new, and of course bringing home some of the rewards. And this is, of course, what you're doing a lot, highlighting people who have dared to try and many times succeeded also.
So speaking of our beloved CSOs and Chief Sustainability Officers and their roles, a lot of that talked in this podcast also about the cultural aspect. And I always refer to some of the skills they need to study from a consultant company where they said it's the Chief Sustainability Orchestrator, because there's a lot of, there's somebody really playing the violin and you better don't touch them. But if you put them together with a strong piano and some other people in the band, then maybe even let's say CEO as a violinist or the piano player might even be in concert. Now, what do you think are either some of the skills they CSOs should have and or develop, using your terms? What makes a good leader in sustainability? What do you think?
I mean, I do think that our more than 1,000 experts do have some clues. Like looking at the 23 skills of the Inner Development Goals framework shows many of these skills. And it's not only about the chief sustainability officers, but the culture in general. And I do think we need to get better at the collaborating dimension, for example, co-creation skills, mobilization skills. Like, how do we mobilize people? How do we rally around some of the initiatives? I also really think that trust and how to build trust and get people motivated. Not everybody care about sustainability. So I think also working with the inner compass and not telling people this is what you must or should do, but realizing what people care for and how can they be intrinsically motivated to making these changes, even if they're not sustainability advocates in general. So this is, as you say, there is many hats. They need to be psychologists, they need to be orchestra leaders, but also long-term orientated system thinkers. I really think that some of the skills in the thinking dimension, like sense-making, like what stories are we telling? Because I think the gloom and doom stories have not been helpful. So what are the other stories we can tell? And where I think that the IDG initiative in general have found something. There is a better, larger story we can tell that puts sustainability higher on the agenda and where we actually get more people on our team, because I think a lot of people feel lonely, where we can get the whole HR department involved in saying, look, sustainability, it's a people's game. We need to work together. And to also say that it's the most meaningful thing we can do is working on ourselves as we face the global challenges. It's good fun. It's the most meaningful, eudaimonian, if we use Aristotle, way of happiness that we can achieve is actually working on our inner development, finding meaning in facing some of the biggest challenges in the world. And that sort of narrative, in framing it like a hero's journey, like this huge challenge that gives us agency, is something that I think chief sustainability officers can do better in advocating for the changes needed. And it's happening. I think it's really a movement that is on the go.
And you have 5 dimensions in the inner development goals, as you said. Is there maybe one dimension that is harder to achieve for either CSOs, leadership, and or even society? I like the whole storytelling part, but is there one, let's say, breakthrough which is the tougher one out of the 5?
I mean, I think it's different for all of us. I'm a serial entrepreneur, so I would say maybe the hardest one is acting, is actually to do it, not to talk about it, to start acting with courage, perseverance, creativity. But I do think that we all bring different dimensions to it. Some people are really grounded into the thinking dimensions. Others are great collaborators already. And I think we need all these personality types all together. But what is sometimes difficult in the corporate world is bringing the being dimension without bringing in all the stereotypes that it needs to be mindfulness or people sitting in a lotus position, but saying, a lot of the being skills like presence and openness and also inner compass, personal values, as we talked about, there is a science to it that you can develop that. There is a way, if we remind our leaders about their personal values and how they want to show up as leaders, they're actually going to be more long-term orientated and not kill some of the ideas too early or shut down. So I do think there is good science in how we build the skills in all the dimensions, and dare to speak about also being.
So if we look more towards the future, starting with the CSO and then maybe with your work, but what do you think the role of sustainability? I think in 5 years we talk about more about regeneration rather than sustainability, but the story is evolving. What is a positive outcome in 5 years from now where, development skills have been, progressed and the leadership has a new role? What kind of, let's say, progress would you see in a positive way that is developing?
For me, what I see is I think we've been living in a time in between when many people have been struggling for meaning, and we can see it in the crisis of youth with well-being and psychological challenges that many of our children or peers are facing. And I do think that the sustainability challenge gives us this existential larger why that is actually uniting humanity and helping us to find meaning in a natural way where it's not forced and it's not just anything goes, but it sets some limitations that gives us a direction and also a shared purpose. And I think religion have had that function, or has that function still in many societies, but as many of us do not turn to religion for that. And I'm not saying that sustainability should be the new religion, because that has, of course, its own shadows. But that can really bring a sense of meaning, a larger why, and hopefully a joy in progressing towards something meaningful than just, earning up to a bigger house or a faster car. And that I think is something that helps us to stay more connected to who we want to be, to our humanity, but also to each other, to really celebrate when we make advancements in a meaningful way. And this is where I think we're moving.
So where are you moving? What's ahead for you? What are you looking forward to in the fresh new year? There's probably a lot of milestones already on your agenda, in your calendar. What are some of the things that you're looking forward to?
Some of the highlights is we're kicking off a new learning journey for our corporate partners. So basically one of our visions is to get the corporate people from both sustainability and HR to release their patents on human development and share the best stuff they have. So once a month, we're gathering leaders to learn together and to try out new tools to accelerate towards sustainability. And we've redesigned the whole learning journey based on the input of our current partners. And I think we really have something. We have something in world class where people from different walks of life, quite high up in the organization, come together and see, Google maybe is good at the data-driven decision-making, and they can teach us that. And maybe IKEA is this little bit more humbler, Swedish, strange company. They can teach us a little bit about collaboration or how they are working with that. And the IDG framework is giving us a shared language, because every company has, of course, their own values, leadership principles, their own methods. And here in the learning journey, we gather, we inspire each other, and we steal with pride. Like Picasso said, you want to be a good artist, you steal. So just bring stuff home unapologetically and use it directly. So I'm really looking forward to that. And of course, our summit in October 15th to 17th, where we'll have Amy Edmondson talking about psychological safety, Peter Senge on system thinking, and many, many other big names and speakers who are trying to inspire and show the way how to apply their methods and science to help us advance towards SDGs.
Fantastic. I mean, such a great journey just within 3 years from, let's say, an island outside of Stockholm to covering the world. Tell us a little bit about the span of your organization. So obviously your startup mode, small, but with a global reach. You mentioned the White House. How far in different continents are you and how is that organized with local groups or ambassadors?
Thank you. It's incredible. I mean, we're around 30 people working locally, like for the foundation, and then there is around 700 hubs that are self-organized. Some hubs are quite big and have like focus on research or sustainability or psychology, so they are thematic or networks around the world. And some are more local, like country-wise or region-wise. Many of the hubs organize their own events. I hear every month. Last month, I think we had the Minister of Education in South Korea opening up a forum on the Inner Development Goals with 300 people. So the framework is translated into many languages, and then the hubs are using their local events. And once a year, we gather in Stockholm. All the thought leaders, since we're an NGO, we're usually not paying for our great speakers, but we do get them out. We own an island in the archipelago, and we tell them, you're never going to experience this much brains in a sauna, like in our sauna on the island. Post-summit, we take them out there to experience the magic of Swedish nature, to come down, to reflect, and also give us input on strategy and narrative building on how to work with these huge systemic challenges in a way that is open source and helps the discourse, that helps tell a better story, a story that is hopeful and that is giving people hope and agency in these challenging times.
Last question. If you had a magic wand, what would you use it for any kind of change in the next 1 or 2 years?
I mean, my magic wand would for sure help people with emotional maturity. I do think if I could help some of our global leaders not to be afraid of their emotions or to meet people with other values or worldviews and just have the ability to hold more emotionally and perspective-wise, I do think that a lot of the technical stuff, we would figure it out if we would just have the patience internally.
All right. Leadership par excellence. Thank you, Jan. It's been a pleasure to have you in our podcast. And thank you really so much for being here with us. If everybody wants to follow you, then please go and check out the IDGs and check out the tremendous work you're doing and bringing to the leadership in general, but especially also to leaders in sustainability. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you, Harald, for the great work you do. It's a pleasure to be co-creating with you. Thanks all for listening.
Thank you.